Everyone on earth can relate to a horrible day at work with a coworker you're pissed off at. And you'd be a liar if you said you didn't think about just grabbing them by the scruff of their neck and smacking them in the head. Now, most well-adjusted people would go home and rant about their bad day at work to their family and be done with it. But this story takes a much different turn. And for how dramatic of a story it is, the tale of what happened one miserable November day on Vancouver Island in the year 1926 has almost completely been lost to time. It all took place between a group of loggers in a clear cut near Ladysmith. It was another foul day in the freezing October rain when one 35-year-old Oscar McMahon, who was the chaser, tasked with unhooking chokers on the logs that are drug into the landing, started up a fire to try and stay warm while he stood around in the landing. Unfortunately for this man, the wind was not in his favor, and the smoke from the wet wood ended up being blown toward the young man operating the steam donkey, who in turn had no desire to inhale campfire smoke. And in the world of 1920s logging, testosterone, brute force, and ignorance ruled the woods, and there was no place for nice words. The 22-year-old who ran the steam skidder, George Michie, must have been tearing an ungodly strip off McMahon when two other loggers joined in on the barrage, insulting his having a fire to warm himself, and then went at him for his technique of loading logs. So in a fit of rage, McMahon yelled a vow of revenge and said that he would quote-unquote get them. However, weeks went by and there was no sight of him, and he was long forgotten by the entire crew as they went back to busying themselves with their hard labor. It wasn't until a total of 5 weeks had passed, in the dark early morning of November 28, 1926, the operator of the donkey working adjacent to Michie's was taken aback by the sight of McMahon, who had returned to work, allegedly to clean one of the two donkey boilers on site. When McMahon reached the operator, he asked if the same crew was working where they were the same as before he had received his dressing down and had departed from his job. The man confirmed it was the same crew, and all McMahon said ominously was, "I'll settle this whole thing this morning." And so work commenced, and as the day's logging began, Michie, who saw who was back on the claim, was hailed over by McMahon. As he drew near, the other donkey engineer tried to warn him, but it was to no avail. McMahon, being a veteran of the First World War, was no stranger to the handling of a rifle, and raised the rifle that he had smuggled with him on his mission all the way from Vancouver back to the woods of Ladysmith to finish what he swore he would end. With one deafening crack, McMahon fired and dropped Michie like a sack of hammers. A bullet struck him square in the stomach, and he fell a ways downhill on the forest floor. As Michie lay in agony, bleeding to death from the hole in his stomach, McMahon slowly approached, and in doing so, chambered a new round. The last words the 22-year-old ever heard were, "I will put you out of your misery," while the muzzle of the rifle was stuck square behind his ear, and he was executed. During this callous murder, the other donkey engineer ran down the railroad grade to the other crewmen on his hit list, telling them to run for their lives, and luckily they escaped unharmed. McMahon now stood over the bloody corpse, gun in hand, and warned all the other petrified crewmen to keep their mouths shut. He took off in search of his other victims, and as police from Duncan, Nanaimo, and Chemainus arrived on scene with the coroner, another shot was heard. Even with the aid of bloodhounds, McMahon could not be caught. The heavy rain and thick underbrush of the standing timber covered his tracks. For 4 months, McMahon was one of the most wanted men in British Columbia, until police finally stumbled upon decomposed remains near Mount Cecil, not a mile from where the murder had took place. The corpse bore with it the same type of caliber Mauser rifle that was used in the murder. The body was undoubtedly what remained of Oscar McMahon. It was plain for the officers to see he had taken off into the woods before giving up trying to stay on the run, and instead found a place to rest before he decided to take his own life and shooting himself in the head. There is obviously no happy ending to this story, or hardly a fitting way to conclude it. But the next time you're at work and get mad with a coworker, think back on this story, which has all but been forgotten in the last 98 years since it took place, and remember what happens when you let your emotions get the better of you. If you ever catch up to Oscar McMahon in the sweet hereafter, Ask him if his final act was worthwhile.
Boy, that escalated quickly. I mean, that really got out of hand fast.